All right. So let's start with prioritizing self-care in our lives. I would say for me, coming into this relationship, I had zero concept of self-care outside of I wanted to work out because it made me feel good. But even within that, I had a very unhealthy relationship in terms of I needed to work out to be as fit and thin and acceptable looking as I needed to be. But it did, give me some release. But other than that, self-care for me was a selfish thing. And when you tried to practice self-care, such as going golfing with friends or with your dad, I very much had a hard time with like, well, why don't you want to be with me? Because I had such an unhealthy view of self-care and taking time and space. What would you say about you on self-care?
Well, I think it's interesting that you identified golf as being part of my self-care, because when we first started dating and then got married, I didn't even know what the term self-care was. So I didn't have a plan. I didn't consciously say I need to do this for me, because of my background and trauma in my childhood. I was overachieving, very hard charging, out there, succeed type person. And so I was just basically on full tilt or 100 miles an hour to do what I thought was the right thing, but also that was for me to be in control because of the control I didn't have in my childhood. And so there was no real thought of self-care. It was just go, 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 and don't slow down to figure out what either that self-care would be, or I'm sure we'll get into it later, what you and I are now going through now.
Yeah. 100%. I think, that was probably the context. Most of these talking points we're going to talk about today, neither one of us had really an understanding or an application of them in our lives. And what that did is it created just more unhealthiness within ourselves, which if you're unhealthy in yourself, it's going to be very difficult to be healthy in your relationship. What we did have, and that has kept us together through these years and through these bumps, is we had a great love for each other, a great commitment to that love that we, by golly, we were kind of, when we started hearing about the people that were kind of saying these things about us and kind of against us, we're kind of like, screw you, we'll show you. And I think that drove us because we're both very stubborn. We're both very competitive. And we very much came into this relationship of, I think for me, for sure, and I think even you to a degree, we're leaving that other shit behind us. And we're going to create this bond, and we're going to go out there in the world and be better together. And we're just going to trudge our way through this and figure this out. And I think that commitment from the get-go, however unhealthy we were, really kind of sustained us in some of the hardest days, because there have been some very difficult days.
There have been, and I think I would 100% agree with that. I think one of the things that happened that, we didn't necessarily plan it this way, but at least started us down a path of us building a life with ourselves, however messy it was early, and even as little as 5-6 years ago, however messy it was, we got out of being in family shadow and went to a place where we didn't have family. And we relied on ourselves, Sierra on the way and then arriving, went to Medford, Oregon. And regardless of how hard that was or even how unintentional it was extremely important, I think, for us building that foundation of relying on each other, because I agree with everything that you just said, Melissa. And I guess I would add that there was always this underlying piece of me that, regardless of how messy things were or what I was bringing into the relationship that was causing strife or challenge or something we had to walk through, there was that underlying part of me that really was, this has to be different. There's a better way. This woman is my soulmate, and I'm committed to doing what's necessary, even though I'm not doing it right now, or happy with how I'm doing it right now. But there's got to be a way to do this. And I think that was an underlying thing that helped guide me through the early pieces of just any marriage coming together and having to figure out two people come together that were separate individuals and now you're one. But then the baggage that we brought into it as well from our trauma, there was just this underlying piece of, there is a path, there's got to be something better from a relationship standpoint.
Yeah. And Brady's referring to shortly after we got married, about 5 months after we got married, we found out we were pregnant with Sierra. And then Brady stepped away from grad school. I was finished with my undergrad and working. He said he was in grad school at the time at Washington State University, decided we would probably need 2 salaries to sustain a new family, and took a job with the University of Oregon. That moved us to Medford, Oregon, because he was the Southern Oregon, Northern California development.
Nevada.
Yes, and Nevada development representative. More on Nevada later. Representative for University of Oregon. So we moved to Medford, which is about a 10 and a half, 11-hour drive from his parents, which had a very heavy influence on us early on. 6 to 7 hours away from mine, who I was not in contact with at the time.
Well, it became estranged with.
Yeah, estranged with.
We were in Medford
for 10 years while we were in Medford. And
again, while we were in Medford.
Yes, absolutely. And then another 12 hours away from Mike and Annie Fels, who really became an adoptive parent role in my life. So we were really on our own in that space for almost 2 years. And I would say that set the groundwork that we needed. I wonder, and we will never know, if we'd stayed close and not created that space where we were so not dependent on each other in a healthy way, but just like, there's no one here to bail us out or give good or bad advice. We got to figure this out together. And that really created that bond, I think, that really gave us the foundation we needed for all that was to come. Because even at that point, we didn't fully understand all that was to come.
Oh, we had no clue.
We were pretty young and naive at that point. And when we reference all that was to come, we're going to talk about that, but only in a way that we feel comfortable with. I came up in a very emotionally, mentally traumatic home, both with parents that didn't have a lot of good, healthy self-care relationships, identity with themselves, as well as the role the Mormon relationship played in that. And so there was a lot of trauma within that was started at a very early age, starting when I was probably 4 or 5. Brady, you want to give some context that you're comfortable with to yours?
Yeah. And this has been my journey the last year and a half and working through it, but had always known, and a lot of what drove me to be overachieving, was sexually abused by my oldest brother from age 4 to 7, and then sexually abused by 2 strangers after that up to age 10. So I'd been sexually abused from age 4 to 10, had never dealt with it. There was a lot of rage and shame and guilt that was driving my overachieving, being a really successful college athlete, and achieving in grades in college. I wanted to be the youngest AD in the nation. I mean, that type of motivation, all fueled by me not addressing and dealing with the trauma, the pain, the hurt, the shame, the guilt, and the rage of my childhood experience that way.
Yeah.
And carried the secret around until this past summer. Carried that secret for 49 years, rather than my hot babe knowing. Family did not know, and shared that secret with the family this summer. So it's been a heck of a growth summer between July to now, and all that entails, and letting that 49-year secret out.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is, and I think this really started our bond of trust too, is Brady shared this information with me probably about 3 months into our dating relationship, which with all of his holding that back and not sharing that, I think that really established a bond of trust. And I think to a certain degree, it was probably a little bit of a test to see how I would handle that, to see whether this relationship could have any legs to it. Would you say that was true, or was it just a
maybe
trust thing?
Portion of it true. You always say that, but the way I mostly process it is that I was finally felt like I was in a safe space and safe with you, that I could tell you. I believe that I had to tell you fairly early on to see if you wanted to stick around. But the very first part of that was feeling safe enough and me having a strong enough relationship that I knew that this could or would be the one. And so I wanted to share that to see if it was going to be something that we could deal with.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point there too, is this for us, our relationship starting out, as much as we went through some bumps, was the first place both of us felt safe. I'd come out of a very mentally and emotionally abusive relationship for 3.5 years prior to that. I very much grew up in an environment where performance for love was the theme. There was a lot of words saying I was unconditional love, but there was no actions to go with it. This was the first person and place that he was the first person that loved me unconditionally. Outside, I have some key friends, but friendships are different. And you'll get to meet some of those friends in a couple of weeks. But within this kind of a relationship, this context, this intimacy level, he is the first one that ever unconditionally loved me. So there was definitely that safety between us, which again, I would add to gave us what we needed to weather the storms that hit us. We just had that early sense of trust and safety.
Yeah. And for me, a couple serious relationships in high school, and I just cringe at the poor women that I did date because I know I wasn't available emotionally and all the rest, and looking back on it. But some serious relationships in high school, but only a couple. And then in college, really pretty much the complete opposite. I mean, nothing I'm proud of, obviously, but Melissa knows this story and my girls know this story. I mean, again, all of this rearing its ugly head. I mean, at one point I was dating 8 different women in one semester. That's not healthy. I had no clue why I was doing that. And it certainly was completely unfair to those women. But I mean, that's where I was in college. And then so to come into this relationship and know fairly early, if not instantly, it was different and that it was special and that it was one that had that potential. I mean, I think that's why I went down the road within 3 months that I went down with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. To all of that. So from a self-care standpoint, there was a turning point for us. We started seeing our daughters in their 20s start doing some work in self-care. And we're far enough along to know that this wasn't something, I had spurts of it. I really try, I tried to maintain working out. I tried to make sure that I had, coffee dates with friends, but really nothing intentionally deep. It was all pretty like taking time, doing something I wanted to do, but not real deep, meaningful, restful, rejuvenating, long-term self-care. And that has an effect on relationships in terms of martyr complex. I'm always the one giving all my time to the family. I'm always the one doing this. I'm always the one doing that. And that caused a lot of, friction over the years. But we kind of came to a point, a couple of years ago, and really the pandemic brought it to light, where if we want this relationship as the girls are growing on to really be as healthy as it can be, it's time for us to deal with our stuff, both as individuals and as a couple. And that led to some very difficult conversations and scary conversations that we didn't really know where it was going to lead us, but we just knew for ourselves and in fairness to this relationship that we had to feel better, be better, do the work. Would you say that's accurate? Are
you talking about the recent conversation in the last, whatever it was, a year?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that has come through before that. I mean, we'll kind of flash forward into where we are now, which is, I think, the result of, yes, our daughters showing us the way, the result of our characteristics that we brought into this marriage to stay committed and to be devoted and all the rest. But the growth that we've done individually over, for me, last year and a half, maybe a little more than 2.
Yeah, just over 2.
Just over 2. And then what that has meant for our marriage, which at first, as I got into counseling and was going through what I was going through and almost kind of catching up with you, we had some really hard conversations at the beginning of, 3 months into my counseling, as I really started to dive into it. In conversations that I think are good for us to share here. I don't know if you want to do it now or later, but I mean, I think that's the kind of our next journey and farther down the path, not end results yet because we aren't there, but in between, so much occurred from us being in Medford to where we are now that there's a lot to cover that way too. But I would 100% agree that once we got into counseling here in Lubbock, and 3 months into me getting into counseling, we had at least one extremely difficult conversation that, quite frankly, you and I have talked about this, where we don't think a lot of couples survive them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that more through some different talking points. So for self-care, I think sometimes people get into relationships and you get into marriage, you're like, okay, we're together now. We do everything together. And you still have to make time for that self-care to be the best self for that relationship. You still have to make that space, that quiet time. Sunday afternoon is my quiet time, my quiet space. I don't answer the phone. I'm not on social media. I watch what I want to watch. I do what I want to watch. And I do it with myself. Sometimes I do things with Brady if he's home. A lot of times he's golfing during that time, but it's okay for me to do that. He golfs twice, a week. And so making that space where we can fill up and do things that we care about so that we can come back to the relationship with the energy that it deserves. And it's not selfish to take that time. And it's good for you to take that time.
Yeah. And I would say, I think we're just now putting those in place over the last year and a half. If we look at the marriage, we're not having that insight or vernacular to talk about self-care and be a healthy self-care, because, to a degree or by definition, I might have been doing self-care, but a lot of my things were unhealthy that I was doing through certainly the early to mid part of our marriage. We didn't have individual self-care packages back then, which caused strain for both of us. And I think that would be a major thing I'd want to share with your audience is there's no better time to start that than now, wherever you're at, regardless of if you're 30 years into a relationship like we are in a marriage, or if you're just starting out. Or if you're thinking about, we've got a daughter and a great young man who are getting fairly serious. And if they're thinking about marriage, start talking about this stuff now. I would encourage that for any couple that's starting to get serious, to talk it out beforehand. Not that our girls need much direction at all in this area, but our oldest daughter and son-in-law, Tim, they do a great job of this, and they started it very early in their marriage, if not before when they were dating. So there's any time is a great time to start this. And, the more and more I think about it and work through it, I'm not as disappointed or upset that we didn't do it earlier. We were doing what we could do with the knowledge and skills that we had at the time. But from the standpoint of seeing the value of being able to do that much earlier in our marriage, oh goodness, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Confidently setting boundaries. I don't think you and I even knew what boundaries were till about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, there were no boundaries. I just think back to the original podcast, and I think I used the phrase that boundaries were something I believed you had to smash through. So, there were no boundaries. It was kind of all open to everything and wide open. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes that got us off kilter. And
I would say whenever we were having discussions, if it wasn't going the way I wanted, I just kept pushing. I had no concept of when to take a timeout, when to stop. And Brady would in turn, it never worked. He would at one point just shut down, and then we would kind of just not talk about it for a few hours. And then we'd apologize later and move on. And we never really dealt with it. It didn't blow us up, but it definitely wasn't a healthy way of resolving things. And
well, I think it goes back to too, and everything, hindsight's so great in 2020. But, your trauma led you to, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you not being heard and seen and known. And my trauma led me to wanting to be in control of myself, since I wasn't during the abuse. And, those two things clashed. And you're absolutely right. Classic for somebody who's gone through what I went through as a kid. Stonewalling or disassociating or completely shutting down was regular in our marriage when conflict came around.
Yeah. And whereas I was I am not done speaking, by golly, and you're going to hear me because I have a voice and I have an opinion and it's going to be heard. And it was, as I look back now, whereas now we have language for that. We're not afraid to say
and understanding.
That's very true. Through counseling with both of our in therapy separately, working on ourselves, and even just the model that the girls have given us in terms of language to use around difficult conversations and setting parameters. And thank you, Brene Brown, learning how to rumble and knowing when to all right, I'm at my max point. I need to step back, or I don't have the bandwidth for that conversation today. Can we come back at this time? And setting specific times so that they didn't get forgotten or shoved under the rug or caught up in the busyness of life. That it was revisited, in a way that's thoughtful, talking in I statements, talking, the story I'm telling myself versus the accusational, you should, you didn't, you couldn't, get rid of the shoulds and coulds. But we didn't do that for years. And it takes the defensiveness out of the language too. And that's been a game changer.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Brene Brown has been, I think, fantastic for us and our entire family.
Yeah.
I think, too, though, a major piece of that is that understanding or empathy. I mean, just better understanding and appreciating and being empathetic of where either one of us has come from has helped tremendously as our relationship and marriage continues to evolve and elevate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health. We could talk about this topic alone for an entire, if not multiple episodes, because I think one of the biggest things we have learned through this journey individually and collectively is how much unresolved emotions, unprocessed trauma, unprocessed emotions have affected directly our physical health, and how every different health thing we have been faced with and have been dealing with is directly affected to that unprocessed emotional trauma and physical trauma that we've never finished out doing, and how that played out in our lives. Early on, we had no concept of this. They were different sectors, and we had very unhealthy ways of dealing with these things. I very much had a martyr complex, codependent, sarcastic. Okay, well, that's fine if you want to go do that. I'm just going to be here doing all the other things while you're out golfing or hanging out with Nick or doing whatever. You fine, you go do that. Had no language, had no understanding of. It wasn't what Brady was doing in the moment as much as it was things that I'd never processed from my life growing up. Even Brady would say early on, and for a lot of years, I am not your dad. I am not going to respond, react, or do things that he did. So you need to, I'm asking you to consider that I will never be that way. So as we have this conversation, please consider that instead of responding or reacting in a way that acts as if I'm going to. I think that's one very small example.
Yeah. And on my side, I was, again, on full tilt. So, I was out to find happiness or pleasure, to mask everything I wasn't dealing with. And that resulted most of the time, and I think gregarious, kind of fun-loving Brady, if you will. But more times than I would ever have hoped, significant over drinking and, a gambling piece that was a huge trying piece of our marriage, all related to me not dealing with that trauma and all of the pent up energy of having not released that trauma and not slowing down to sit in it and let it wash over me and resolve it. But running from it and created both stress in our marriage, but that's not good from a physical self either on the body. Yeah. And so that was a pretty good go-to throughout, especially while with trying to be an athletic director, chasing being an athletic director and all the rest, but it stayed around after that as well. Mm-hmm. So just now getting to a point of really realizing that somatic piece of the trauma and not resolving it and where it is in my body. I can point to multiple spots and trying to work through that because, medicine doesn't have an answer for the ailments that I've had, especially over the last 2 years. They have drugs and they've assigned those drugs, and those drugs haven't helped a bit. And so they don't have an answer for that, modern medicine. And I think that's a major case of when medicine doesn't take into account the childhood adversity. They cannot treat their patients properly, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I would say that's where there really has to be a better merging of the holistic health, how you're processing your trauma, how you're processing your emotions, what are your habits for that, and how you're eating, how you're feeding your body. In the perfect medical model, your doctor, your therapist, your dietitian, there'd all be one conversation about these things. It wouldn't be these sectored out things that Western medicine has created. Yeah. We both have issues health-wise that have come up over the last few years that when we have tests run on us, it doesn't show anything substantial. And that's what really got our attention to. This has to do with what we haven't dealt with, emotionally. We've had some great, guides through that. What are the two sisters? The book, The Two Sisters, they were on Brene. Yes, Nagasaki Hoons. What is that book again? I referenced it in earlier episodes. Burnout. Burnout. If you don't have, we will put it in the sources notes. Burnout was huge for both of us and really spoke to me. We've also had some other books that we've read.
Body Keeps a Score.
Body Keeps a Score is a big one.
Martha Brooks, the North Star.
Yeah, the North Star. So just that kind of confirmed what we already believed, but gave us some language to it and some habits to recognize and some practices to it that we could do to really bring all those things together into play. I mean, we know we each have our own way of doing that, but it's a difference maker. And we know the triggers. We see it in each other. It's, understand, we'll tell each other, maybe take some breaths, take some time, get grounded in your body. You should go for a walk. Have you done your yoga? I mean, we all kind of know and recognize those things in each other now. And it's a huge difference maker. And in seeing, and I've already had things that I've been able to come off of because I've put these other practices into place, but just the toll that it's taken on us, I would say through the years, it's kind of a miracle we got through some of those tough issues between the way I dealt with things in very much a martyr, codependent, defensive, guilt trip way, and the way you dealt with things through gambling and the spans of time you disappear within that, financial issues that brought up. Between it, the fact that we survived that is kind of miraculous. But I think it just goes back to those early roots that we planted.
Yeah, and I think about, we haven't even talked about probably the biggest stressor challenge in our marriage.
Yeah.
Until recently, and that was the intimacy issue.
Yeah.
What we brought in from our childhood adversity were diametrically opposed from the other person's.
Yeah.
And so from a standpoint of not being in control of my body, once I got to be an adult, I wanted to be in control of everything. And I was, pure and simple, I was over-sexualized in our marriage. But having no control over that from age 4 to 10 and what that did to change my brain and send me down the path that I've been sent down. I figured finally I'm married, then okay, cool, this is great. We're going to be intimate all the time. And that's not what you came into the marriage with,
no.
Rightfully so. And so we were, I was way too far down one end of the spectrum and you were way too far down the other one. And it has probably been the major thing.
Yeah.
Marriage.
Probably the biggest tension of all, because I came in on the flip side, growing up in a very conservative Mormon environment where sex was essentially introduced as something that you had to have children. And, oh, by the way, it feels good too. And it's a nice bonding thing, but it's really about the family. It's about your husband being satisfied. You wanting to be sensual or satisfied is dirty and inappropriate and not pure and not in line with the Proverbs 31 woman. All these lies that, by the way, are not from God. They are not true. These are man-made declarations. They are made
emphasize man.
Yes, man. Yeah, patriarchal bullshit. I'm just going to call it what it is. But it did a number on me. Only added to the fact that I was in a sexual relationship in that 3.5-year relationship prior to Brady that I've spoken to in earlier episodes, that I was made to feel downright dirty and damaged, and between my parents and the Mormon church, that, well, now you've got to jump through these hoops, and now you're going to have to find a man that's okay with him not being the only sexual partner you have. Heck with what the man's pattern was or what he brought into it. It was all about me and what I'd done and how I'd allowed my body to betray me, which has also led to me having a very unhealthy relationship with my body, how I see my body as a betrayal and not to be trusted, rather than the beautiful whole piece it was made, by the way, by God to be. God gave me all of these sensations and all of these pieces and created this to be enjoyed in a healthy relationship. But all I heard was, dirty, weak, bad decisions, untrustworthy. So I brought all that in to this relationship. And I think we both somehow thought that getting married and being together was just going to miraculously solve all that all of that trauma and all those bad feelings were just going to go away.
Well, I would like to think that's what we thought, but I think it was more just ignorance that we didn't know all of that and how it was affecting us individually, and therefore how it was affecting our marriage and our intimacy. So,
yeah.
It is. I don't even call it a minor miracle. I mean, it's a miracle that we're where we are now. And it is because of that underlying piece that I think both of us had of, we know that there's a better path, a better end result out there. And I think, it showed up at least in what we were trying to do with our daughters.
Yeah.
While there were moments and nobody's perfect. I mean, we were always continuously talking about generationally stopping things and doing things different with our kids. I think we would have been would have behooved us tremendously if we would have talked about that from our marriage standpoint as well. But we had kids right away and all the rest too. So, I mean, we weren't as focused necessarily on working through all of those things in our marriage as well. But it was there, an underlying piece, even with our stressors and our knockdown dragouts when they happened. There was that underlying piece of us being committed to each other and knowing that there was a better route out there for us.
Well, and too, I would say, despite our upbringings in very patriarchal religions, we didn't come into our relationship that way. And we came into it. I came into it knowing, like, hell no, we are gonna be partners. No man's in charge of me. And you came into it despite being raised Catholic. Your parents did not function in a very the man's ahead of the house function either.
No. And that was an absolute blessing. My mother, awesome mom, who really modeled that growing up. We were one sister and 3 brothers growing up in a household of a generation of a couple that you wouldn't think that would happen.
Yeah.
But my mom definitely did that. We all learned how to wash clothes. We all did chores. We did dishes. We did everything was shared. And I think it's because of her upbringing when it wasn't that way in her household. And she said, damn, that's not going to happen in my household.
Yeah. And
it was, especially for that era, it was as even shared marriage as you would find in that generation. Mm-hmm. They have been great examples on that front. And that's, I think, a big piece of, we knew that there was a different way to do it.
Yeah. So we didn't really prescribe to, even though we went from being in Catholic Mormon environments to a few years of nothing to moving into a more evangelical space, that we've moved out of that now because of all of the issues
for good reason.
Yeah, for that. And if it have really pursued our spirituality in a very relational way with God in a much bigger, broader expanse. And that's a whole other topic and episode. But But that also, I think, was a big part because I had an interesting conversation with one of our daughters a few weeks ago. And, she's like, I always understood that you guys had challenges and things, but you guys I always knew that you loved each other and were fiercely for each other and that you were partners. And because I asked her, I go, during the years when we were having hard times or struggling and you guys were old enough to recognize when we were having some knockdown drag outs, did you ever feel concerned? Or was she like, no, because I just always knew above and beyond how much you fiercely loved each other and would fight for each other. And I was like, well, that's kind of a miracle considering that all. But I think that, again, going back to that, we keep saying that, but that's what sustained us through these very, very difficult spaces where we weren't in the same space and didn't fully understand why. Like, why did I not feel safe? How could I feel dirty in my marriage bed? That didn't even make sense. Not understanding the trauma I had not dealt with and processed through to be able to feel safe. And the same for you in a different way.
Yeah. For me, it was, I didn't know any better. So I thought, once you get married, everything's great and you're going to have that intimacy. And so when it wasn't there, the stories I started telling myself and the frustration and not knowing how to work through it and all the rest. And we tried a lot of different things. It's not that it was, just throw your hands up. We continue to work on it. We just didn't have good language or good skill set around it. But, we went eventually to a piece of, with all my travel, that we would, you would come with me every second or third month or what have you. And those were the times where, I would really see you let your guard down. We'd be out on the road somewhere. I'd be doing my work by day and even having dinners with you invited and all the rest. But in the time that I wasn't working while on the road and you were with me, your guard was down. That was a window into, I think, what our intimate life could or should be on a consistent basis.
Yeah. And I was not able to separate I'm in the home, I'm the mom, I have to be proper and appropriate. It is not appropriate for a mom to be sensual and have desires and feel good. But when we go on trips and go to the hotel, which is the two of us, it freed me up. And so that was, and that probably saved us in a lot of ways, honestly, because that broke up, spans of weeks and months of not having intimacy versus having intimacy.
Yeah. And, I just want to go back to reflect what you had said. And I think you articulated that absolutely right. I just want to put this disclaimer in there for the audience is that that's not true about a mom. And from a standpoint of hopefully couples can work through that and moms can work through that. But what you model your kids to in being able to work through that is enormous for when they have their relationships. Yeah. So
there's no reason in the world that we should lose that or sacrifice or give that up. We as women are women fully. And that if you are a parent, that is an important part, but is one part. And it doesn't mean you sacrifice other parts and any other parts. And if anything, it makes that bond and that commitment and taking that time to feel good even more important because parenting is hard and you need those moments of just feeling like your full self and not feeling guilty about that or wrong about that in any way. How we can support each other in living unapologetically. Brady knows this about me, and he has been my biggest fan and biggest advocate and biggest hype person in this. I am a sorry sayer. I say sorry.
Less now
because of very persistent work and encouragement by my therapist and by Brady. Literally, like if I say sorry, take that back. Okay.
Yeah, we stop everything.
Yeah.
Look her in the eyes. Say, what are you sorry for? Take it back.
Yeah. And reframe the language. It's not just take it back, but reframe the language into what it should be. So I've got some examples here of that I think that my producer editor, Valencia, shared with me a few weeks ago that she found from the millennial therapist, someone she follows on Instagram. Because usually most of the time in those cases, sorry is not what we're really trying to say or what we need. Okay. So some examples are, instead of, I am sorry for being so needy, say, thank you for being there for me. Instead of, I am sorry for talking so much, say, I had so much fun exchanging ideas with you. Instead of, I am sorry for not replying right away, say, I appreciate your patience. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, I'm crying, say, thank you for listening and creating a safe space for me. And that last one really resonated with me because I grew up in a house where it was very much dry it up. That's what you heard when you started crying. There was no room for crying, processing emotions. My parents, especially my dad, would dictate or decide when it was and wasn't okay for you to cry unless you fell down. And even if you fell down and hurt yourself, it was like, you're okay, get up, dry it up. There was no time to just sit in it and process it. So that's manifested itself in some ways. For a lot of years, I just cried at everything, which was frustrating to me because I felt like crying was weakness. And I realized it was I just needed to cry because I hadn't been allowed to finish it out. But also just feeling this sense, I very much grew up in a home where there's a lot of responsibility emotionally, caretaking wise, was put on me at a very early age. And so I was asked to be responsible for not only the physical well-being of the people in my home, but for their emotional management as well. And so if any of those things weren't going right within our home and with our kids, I was sorry because I wasn't fixing that. I mean, I think one time that really got my attention, Sierra, our oldest, was old enough to say, Mom, I don't need you to fix that for me. I was like, oh, okay.
Well,
about that?
And I think back to the Nagoski twins again and their phrase, which I think is human giver. Mm-hmm. And it's primarily women, but there are some of us men that are built, not raised, but fill that role as well. But, it's really, for me, it's a concept of we as a society are so uncomfortable with discomfort that we're going to rush in and fix it, like the term that you just used. Mm-hmm. And women are the ones in our society that have been raised to do that, to be the human givers, to give of themselves so much to others that they don't take care of themselves and that they are apologetic with sorry and everything else. And it goes back to not letting people sit in discomfort. If we don't sit in that discomfort, if we don't deal with emotions, and I'm just learning this in the last year and a half, that's what starts to stay within us and really us not work through and can cause the problems that we're talking about. Yeah. So from that standpoint, really just trying to do it different and trying to sit in that discomfort, to accept it, to recognize, accept, investigate, and then nurture the RAIN concept and make sure that I'm dealing with those feelings and that discomfort. And I think we'd all be best served to do that in our marriages, not to just try and rush in and fix it when it goes, or relationships. It doesn't have to be marriage. Mm-hmm. When something's not going right, but to sit in it and talk about it and to do the RAIN concept, to work through it. Same with our kids when those things are happening, when it's happening with ourselves. So breaking that cycle, I think that would be a great thing if we could break that cycle, especially for women, that they are not set up in society to be the human givers and completely depleting themselves to take care of others. What a more rich society we'd be in if that weren't the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of leads to, so my girls know a lot about the Enneagram. They've used it a lot. And I've always talked about having a love-hate relationship with the Enneagram because I come out as an Enneagram 2 with an arm 1. And I really resisted that for a lot of years for all the negative pieces that it brought into all of what we were just talking about. And I've had a great conversation with our youngest daughter a couple weeks ago. She goes, Mom, you are at the most authentic space in the best way an Enneagram 2. And I think it's okay for you. And it's not because you were brought up in the church, and it's not because you were taught or molded or framed to be that way. You're just authentically that way. So embrace all the good parts about that. And it's okay to be an Enneagram 2 because you truly are in the most authentic way outside of all of those narratives that you heard. It's not just because of those narratives. And so that really gave me a different, fresh perspective on the fact that I do authentically want to help people and lift them up. I do authentically fight for the underdog.
But now not at the price of yourself.
Exactly. And not because of out of acceptance. It's because I have boundaries around it. I have language for it. I recognize if it's a codependency thing or a healthy thing. And so I'm able to do it in the most authentic, healthy way. The importance of setting and coming back to our why. And I think for us, our why in our marriage has just been that we decided, I know I keep saying this, but I'm telling you, it's what sustained us is we just knew from day one that we were safe with each other. And we had a trust and a commitment. And our why was that we were for each other and we trusted each other to love each other unconditionally. And this was really the only experience we had it. Not that we haven't experienced it in different ways with our kids and some friendships, but we always knew that. And so that was going to always be something worth fighting for. Do you want to add anything to that?
I don't think I have much to add. You just articulated it. Fantastic. Absolutely. It's that unconditional partnership has been the why for our marriage. I 100% agree.
Yeah. And always seeing each other as partners and equals. Even though we were all in church spaces, much of our marriage, we always rebutted the idea that Brady was this head of the house, the man of the house, the spiritual leader. I mean, at one point he said to me, he's like, you're way ahead of me spiritually. It would be ridiculous and a disservice to our kids if I were to declare myself the spiritual leader. So I think that, so we've always, we've kind of butted up against some things. We're like, no, that's just not how we are. That's just not what's true for us. And that's not what God made us to be. And we have been, for all the other things, we have been in lockstep on that, I think, from day one.
And I think it's helped us. It's saved us in times. It's been that rock to go back to, even when we were having our struggles. It's been that foundation for us to rest upon and come back to in difficult times.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Now we have done this, growing out of our own expectations versus others. And we told you early on, others expected us to fail, period. And we just never believed that. We had our own expectations. We didn't always go about it in the most healthy way. We had expectations within and of each other that were unhealthy. We talked about the intimacy issues and how we had to learn to not impose what we were struggling with on each other. So we haven't always done it great within it. But in terms of as a couple, we had our own expectations versus the world's. But we also had to learn how to not impose our expectations of our struggle on the other person. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Well, yes, it makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to your audience. I've been living this life with you. So yes, it makes sense to me. But you think of the many different ways of what our families expected, what the two different churches expected, even what our friends expected, and to some degree, what our kids expected. Certainly early on, I mean, they've grown and matured so much and they're so advanced from where we are at their age. But early on, I think they had the societal pressures of what, the marriage should be and all that. And we have been sometimes planned, sometimes intentional, sometimes just out of left field, certainly not been willing to be boundaried by that.
Yeah.
And to live out what we believe should be our marriage. And like we said, sometimes it was up, sometimes it was down, but we had that rock and that foundation, and we were going to do it a way that I think we are continuing to get there and stronger than we've ever been now.
Yeah.
Because we've had that commitment.
Yeah.
At the same time, once kids leave the household, and you're empty nesters, we know so many couple friends that have drifted apart or even divorced after that happened. And we were not going to have that expectation. We were not going to live within that boundary. We knew we didn't want that. And that's been part of why we traveled together, why we went to Europe, why we went every 2 months. We had those talks back then about when the kids get out of the house, and we don't want to be those couples that don't make it or have some, listless, lifeless marriage. So I think we've always been living outside of, or, holding off and not adhering to other people's expectations. We've been trying to set our own, and good and bad. I think much better good now and we're making it.
Yeah. And I think too, to take that another step further, when we embarked on these healing journeys a couple of years ago, both of our counselors have told us at different times, there's a lot of people that just wouldn't be willing to do this work. And another expectation that we have is that we can be the healthiest versions and deserve to be the healthiest versions of ourselves and our marriages as we can be. We don't just have to settle and be comfortable. We can continue to challenge ourselves and do this hard, heavy lift that we are doing right now. This work that we've been doing in our therapy is not for the faint of heart, but we were like, no, we deserve to be the best for ourselves and each other that we can be. And so we're going to do this work, and we're going to be each other's support and fan in it. And we're going to walk this out together because we deserve to have the best, most fulfilling, healthiest life that we can.
Yeah, just a shout out to Addie and Kristen.
Yeah, our therapists, God help them.
We would not be here without them. We are healthier than we've ever been individually and as a couple.
Yeah.
And just a huge plug for therapy. Find that counselor that works for you, because we all have things. I was having a conversation with a really good friend a week, 10 days ago, and relaying some of this and walking through things, and the fact that we all have things that we need to deal with, and that therapy with the right person can help with all that, and not just help, but just unlock the path and person that you're meant to be. And so, again, shout out to Addie and Kristen, and would strongly recommend any and all go find that therapist that works for them. Because even if you do it for 2 months or 2 years, it's going to be beneficial if you really build that right relationship with a therapist.
Yeah. I can't imagine now, as hard as it's been not doing this work and not being in this space. And we're still in the thick of it. We are not, I think that's the other thing we've learned too, is I very much had a checkbox in mind. Like, I'm going to go to therapy for about 6 months. I'm going to check off all these things, and I'm going to move on with my life. Brady's much better at being an enjoy the journey kind of guy. I've had to really
enjoy the journey. I don't think applies to this thing.
But
I've been committed. I mean, I don't remember my childhood very much at all. I mean, I don't have a lot of memories before 4 years old. So I'm committed to exploring and uncovering and healing everything that I possibly can, knowing that I'm not going to end up remembering everything. But from that standpoint, being in that messy middle that Renee talks about and continue to walk through, even though it's difficult at times. And you're absolutely right, Melissa. Kristen and Addie have told us that. Both Addie's told me multiple times, what you have and what you've been walking through. I have a lot of clients who just stop showing up.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine doing that, knowing how far I've come and how that's helped our marriage as well, to not keep on slogging through it and get to the other side.
Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. This is 101 in what we have been doing the last 2 years, because we both individually on these journeys have had a really hard time accepting the layered aspects of ourselves and not just the highlight reel. It continues to be a journey. We both have very unhealthy relationships with our bodies. We both have very unhealthy relationships with speaking kindly to ourselves. So this has been a journey. Now, I would say for each other, I am very accepting of your layers, and you are very accepting of mine. And that support has really given us, I think, that strength we need to keep doing this, because we have someone squarely in our circle that has already accepted those layers. So we need to do. And that I don't know if I could do that without your support.
Well, I agree. And it makes me think, and many times, I know Kristen's told you this too, and Addie has almost regularly told me this, is that how you would talk to Melissa or your daughters or what have you? Because of that commitment to embrace the layers. And I just think about the layers and the layers I don't know that aren't there. For me, not that I was completely void of emotion, but I was so motivated and hard charging and wanting to suppress all the things that we've talked about from my childhood, that when I first started with Addie, I couldn't express my emotions. We had to go to, and I still carry it with me, an emotion wheel to really dive into and to really let that emotion wash over me, not to get stuck in it. I do believe that if you deal with it, and I just read a fantastic book by Jewel and her journey, and so much of that resonated for me, especially in the early half when she was talking about the childhood and how she was processing it and all the rest and the things that she has in there. But to let that emotion wash over and deal with it so it doesn't get stuck and it moves out the other side. And I wasn't doing that a year and a half ago when I first started sitting down with Addie. And so those layers, I'm just now on that journey. I mean, I have not uncovered or discovered all of my layers.
Yeah, no, I am too. I'm embarking on this journey with my relationship with my body. That is this whole other spectrum that I had not really thought a lot about before, giving the attention to, starting to read some books, and really ran into somebody last week. The book will be in there with the absolute correct name. She was on a podcast with Jen Hatmaker last week. And then she also did an Instagram live with Ariel Astoria, which are two great people that I follow. And she was talking about our bodies and our relationships. And she has a faith background. So she was able to really talk about the language of the damage that whole purity culture and growing up with these very definitive ideas around what was and wasn't appropriate for girls, language, and how she grew out of that and came to this healthy space through her own journey. And I couldn't get enough of it. It was just absolutely like, this is me. This is my life in a nutshell. These are my struggles. And so then she's built language around it of I speak to my body, how I recreate those healthy relationships. And it's going to be quite a journey within that. So yeah, the layered aspects are layered.
And I think you have to keep exploring too. I mean, one of the journeys I'm on right now is about internal family systems and parts work. And I have this answer layer that has served me well. I've been so intellectually curious throughout my entire life, but it started out as a defense mechanism for me to start to try and explain what was happening to me back then. And then it led into some very good things. It led into me being one hell of a successful athlete through college. Yeah. It led me to being the youngest associate AD in the Pac-10 at that time because I'm so old, to all my curiosity about severe weather and all the rest. So there's some positive pieces too, but it's also been a detriment because I have to have every answer. I need to know everything. And that has been a big thing that I've worked through in therapy I've probably read, 24 books since getting into therapy because I want to know answers. I want to discover that and really addressing and embracing that answer part of me and letting that answer part know that it has served me well, that I appreciate what it has done for me through the years and that I love it. But it's time to join me and step aside so that my true self with the big S can take the forefront and can be in the lead moving forward, which it hasn't been. It's been covered up and muck and shit and everything else, the vast majority of my life. And it's time for self to take the lead and my ego to come to the side along with all the parts that aren't serving me well anymore.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And I have my own journey with that too. I mean, my growing up life was very much performance based. Well, that led to me being a very successful student and a very good track athlete and, getting selected to various things and throughout my life, girls state and all those scholarships and all those accolades and things that make you successful, very hardworking, very successful at all my jobs, externally successful. But within that was a very healthy drive of proving my worth and being perfect. And that created some unhealthy habits. I really struggled with intrusive thoughts especially around my health these days, but they've showed up in different ways my whole life. My health is just how they're showing up now. And just kind of how that's speaking to me of like, you don't have to have everything, all the answers all the time in perfect synchronicity, to be acceptable, to be healthy, to be good. And so just recognizing, we both have a lot of things that allowed us to survive our scenarios. Yep. That just recognizing what's not serving us well anymore, that we are safe within ourselves, that we are safe with each other.
But those parts need to understand that.
They do.
That they can now be step released to the side and take a step back. So.
And that takes time. I mean, it's one of the things we've both had to really be patient in this process, because it took us 45 to 50 plus years for these things to ingrain themselves. They're not just going to go away overnight with the first run of new ways of thinking and habits we're creating. It's not just going to evaporate. And so that's, I think too, is just knowing that it's a journey every day in reshaping how we see ourselves and how our nervous system responds and learns that it's safe too.
Well, an opportunity now that we have the skill set too, to restart.
Yeah.
The day before wasn't really how we wanted to show up and perform, and really lean into the skills that we've learned and how we want to move forward with all that we're learning. Then the next day or the next hour or the next conversation can restart that and start again using all of that to show up how we want to show up now that we know what we know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cultivating healthy relationships with others. This isn't, we talked a lot about our relationship and what we've had to do to get to a healthy space. Even with all my stuff, I've had close friends. I've had kind of a girl squad, our whole marriage, my ride or die friends. I am pretty outgoing and make friends pretty easily. Would you say?
Absolutely. 100%.
And relationships are very important to me. Brady has had a different experience with relationships, and you talk about that. I don't want to speak to that.
Well, I would say that my square squad is very limited. It's my hot babe, my 3 girls, certainly Tim as he's joined the family, but then a very few handful of close friends, Nick, I would say, Mike and Tom, but very few and far between on that front, and intentional. And it's very much a result of what I've gone through and not being able to trust people. So I got myself into a profession that allowed me to kind of mask that, especially when I was in the athletic world and I was emceeing and kind of certainly reading the room and kind of being one of those people that people would gravitate to and all the rest, and having a lot of acquaintances, but no deep connections. And so it served me well on that. And then I could retreat and hide and not have to have a deep, meaningful relationship, because I had all of these surface level pieces and was very public, and trying to be an athletic director and all the rest. So that has been a lifelong thing for me that I'm just now diving into. And not that I need to have a million deep relationships. I mean, the relationships I have are very meaningful to me, but it takes a lot for me to allow someone into that inner circle and be a part of my square squad. There's no doubt about that.
For sure. And I would say the interesting thing for Brady is there's a lot of people over the years who thought they knew him, who would call him a friend. And for him, it was very much, they were an acquaintance and he kept them at a certain distance. And it was, they very much would have seen himself as this outgoing extrovert when really he's got a lot of introvert qualities. And
my girls would tell the audience stories of me being at just a restaurant and 1 to 5 people coming up to me and acting like they've known me since I was, 15, 10 years old. They'd walk away and the girls would go, "Who is that?" And I'll go, "Can't remember."
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, especially for the girls growing up. So that's just how I have been built, to put up that facade and be completely outgoing and be everybody's best friend, with air quotes up,
but none of them making it into my inner swear squad.
On the flip side of that, you are also one of the most empathetic people that we know. And on an airplane, our girls also make the joke about people are drawn to you. You make friends on the airplane all the time because people are simply drawn to you, and you are a good listener and you're very kind. So talk about that, because that's definitely true too.
Yeah, I think that's a core piece of me, relating everything to what happened growing up, but, not being heard. I've been intentional about, and my profession lends to it too. You can get a lot of people in my world, which is higher education, advancement, or fundraising, that don't have the quality or aren't intentional about their listening, and they're not very good advancement officers. And I made the decision early on, and probably how I was built, that wasn't going to be me. The thing that gives me joy in my job, and one of the few things anymore, to be honest with you, is hearing somebody's story. I just love that. And that rings true on an airplane with strangers. One of my favorite things ever, and I think the girls like it, but also kind of drove them nuts. You're on an airplane and there's a screaming little kid or toddler or baby. I want to be right next to that family, and help the mom, help the parents, hold the kid, do whatever. I've been on airplanes where people have been afraid to fly, and sitting next to them and walk them through that and had conversations. It's just been a piece of me that I do enjoy humanity. I do learning about somebody's story. And so that piece might be a little contradictory with letting people in my square squad, but I'm also not making a commitment to have a lifelong, deep relationship with them. So it's safe for me as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. All right. Thanks for sharing that, babe. How we live out feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers. I think that's kind of the narrative of our whole relationship. I think that we have found a lot of empowerment within ourselves with each other, because we do feel safe. And we've had to walk through some hard things together and you can name any one of the things that we have brought into our relationship, and any one of those things could have taken a relationship down. My early, dependency and codependency, and having to be heard and not respecting boundaries within relationships, the drinking, the gambling, any one of those things. Within that, we were able to walk those roads and find empowerment within ourselves and within our relationship. But I think, we're talking about how, we have found that within all the struggles that we've been through, we've been able to find that.
I think it's been a major tenet of our relationship too, is really empowering each other.
Yeah.
I think that's been at a core, even when we didn't know that was the word or what have you. I think it's always been there. Now that I think about it, we're committed to always empowering each other and having the empathy that we've just talked about recently.
Yeah.
To allow for that, even when we didn't have that skill set or that language.
Yeah, we are definitely each other's biggest hype people. We are definitely each other's biggest supporters. We are definitely each other's biggest believers in each other and what we can do and what we're capable of, and encouragers. 100%. And we in terms of the embracing layers, I've accepted your layers and you've accepted my layers long before we've been able to accept our own layers.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. That even though we couldn't articulate it, we could see that in each other, even while we individually were struggling with or had no concept of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are down to the end here. Rapid fire. And I want to do these in context of things that we enjoy doing together in our marriage. 5 activities that nourish us.
So 5 between us or 5 each?
I think 5 each. I would say we love to travel together.
Well, you're going to steal some of mine. You're going to go first and steal mine.
Well, that's my first one.
Oh, we're going to ping pong?
Yeah.
Okay. I would 100% agree. Travel together. I would say on a somewhat regular basis, might be once a month or so, not get out of bed.
Yes.
Stay in bed for a Sunday.
We do. We have bed days. We discovered those, a year ago? It'll be a year ago in February. I think February of 2021 was our first bed day. Oh my gosh, we love bed days. I love bed days. We love it. So yes, taking that time we're just in bed all day. We watch Netflix. We do journaling separately together. We read. We sleep.
DoorDash, order in.
Yeah, order in. Yeah, no cooking. There's no cooking that day. No showering. That's wonderful. Bed days are wonderful. We also really enjoy concerts and music. I would say, and music for us is huge and was a big sustainer of ourselves through a lot of our journeys, and is really a way we express ourselves individually and collectively.
Mm-hmm. I would say how we nourish ourselves is to be in contact with our kiddos, both individually, but as a fam, regular contact now that they're spread out all over the country.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a huge nourishment piece for us.
And then we also enjoy good food together. We enjoy going out to a good restaurant with a great atmosphere and vibe, have some good drinks. That's something we really enjoy.
And we enjoy cuddling.
We enjoy cuddling from day one. It was one of the first things that Kristen identified as like, Brady will be a great cuddler. Yes. And this is more than 5, but cannot be missed. We are big sports fans. We love college football. We love college basketball. We love college baseball.
Major League Baseball.
We love Major League
on a journey
baseball.
to hit all 30 stadiums.
Yes. How many do you have? I have more than you.
I think I only have 6 left.
Yeah, I've got a lot more than that. Brady's hit a lot of stadiums. So yeah, that's a big thing that we find nourishing.
A big thing for us that has been a nourishment in our marriage has been driving. I feel like that's subsiding a little bit, mostly because probably we're so isolated here that a drive is long, but we've had no problem. And even more than that, we've actually looked forward to a lot of our cross-country drives.
Yeah, people think we're crazy for where we drive to. People cannot believe the hours and places and amount of time we spend driving.
Spokane to Long Island and back, Chicago to Florida, Spokane to Dallas and back.
New York to North Carolina and back a lot. Yeah, we've done that a lot.
I feel like that's subsiding a little bit.
Well, we've done
get older.
It has been. I probably don't enjoy it as much, but we've done a couple of Texas to California trips over the last 3 or 4 of those, up to Colorado. And within that, we build in the music. So we find our favorite playlists. I mean, and food. We build in the music and the food. So we kind of combine that into a lot of the things that nourish us. And I would say some of the girls' best memories with us are the music, the food, and the travel together that we've had. There's certain road trip songs that, that they want to hear because that was a memory from childhood that we did together a lot of time on the road. And
it also got me into their music.
It did. And Brady's much more current than I am that way. I like what I like, but he brings me along. But so yes. Okay. So 5 words on how we want to feel the next 6 months.
I would start with complete.
Yeah. Complete. I would say content / at peace.
Thriving, vibrant.
Yeah. Joyful.
Yes. 1,000,000%. Yes. I'm joyful.
Playful.
Ooh, I like that. Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely one that we are both working on. I think that Brady, with the girls and in environments, this probably comes more naturally to him than me. Yeah, he's always been the fun parent.
Yeah, but I need that safe space with the girls to do so. When we talk about playful, just for me being playful on my own.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing you do. You absolutely struggle with that. And for me, playful was just never something that was encouraged, or it was a waste of time. It wasn't productive. I needed to be responsible. I correlated playful with not being responsible.
Right. For you. For me, it's me not being worthy of being playful.
Oh, yes. Yes. Of giving yourself that time. So yeah, 100% on that. All right. Well, that wraps it up. Thanks so much for being with me here today, babe, and for all your authenticity and vulnerability. Check out, again, all these different people and podcasts and books that we reference. They will be in our sources page. Check out the show notes on embracinglayers.com. We'll also feature them on our Embracing Layers Instagram page. We hope this was helpful. Let us know if you have any questions at embracinglayers.com about any of our sources or resources that we've used or are using. We'd love to support you all in any way that you're needing support. And
thank you for doing this podcast, babe. It is so impactful and so important. I just love the audience that you're reaching. So proud of you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. An example of how he supports me. All right. Have a great week.